Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a lot to cover. So much went down today, right before the show, last night after our show. There's a lot to cover. We're going to start off as we have been in the NBA, as the Boston Celtics are the first team to punch their ticket to the NBA Finals, trying to get that Larry O'Brien trophy, the second time that they have made it in the last 3 years. We will go ahead and talk about that and then talk about their path. Some people are saying it's the easiest path ever. We'll see what some of the numbers say and talk about that as well. So that's our first two segments. We're then going to transition into hockey as a hat trick from Jason Robertson last night powers the Stars past the Oilers for a 2-1 series lead. We'll talk about that game, how it went the first period on, and really everything that went through there. In the fourth segment, we're going to talk about the big second day in a row with some breaking news out of baseball. Angel Hernandez, the infamous umpire, is officially retiring effective immediately. We'll talk about the backstory, how his reign of terror, I guess you could call it, across the strike zone of the MLB has gone, and we'll talk about the backstory for that. And then we're going to finish off our show with the NFL. They're talking about overhauling the whole offseason. There's also some breaking wide receiver news that we will get to today at the end of the show, so stick around for that. But before we get into the Celtics, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave a comment. Go ahead and leave a message at gsmcpodcast.net. I appreciate anything you do give, and I appreciate you sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to start off our show today with the biggest news in sports. The Celtics, the Boston Celtics, sweep the Pacers, advance to the NBA Finals. This is, as I said in the intro here, the second finals for the Celtics in the last 3 years. They obviously made it against the Warriors just a couple years ago, and that didn't work out too well for them. They're still looking for their first World Series, not World Series, first NBA championship win in this era, you should say, in this Jason Tatum era. They've been very good. They've made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, I believe, 5 times in this era. It's a question of whether or not they can get over the hump at this point. It most likely, it seems like they're going to be playing the Pacers. They just beat the Pacers. It seems like they're going to be playing the Mavericks as they're up 3-0, and we'll see if that officially goes through tonight. But the path that they've taken to get to the Pacers, and we'll talk about the Pacers here first. This was a very interesting series, right? On paper, and before this whole playoff started, it'd be a disappointment if the Celtics didn't make the finals, right? So they've lived up to expectations here, at least my expectations at a minimum, is that they made the finals. So they've made the expectations. At least in my opinion, it won't be a disappointment of a season now. So they've avoided that at a minimum. But this Pacers series is fascinating to me because this Pacers team, without their star, at home, played 2 of the tightest games that they've lost. 3 of these games 1, 3, and 4, you could make the argument that they should have won. Right? Game 1, definitely they should have won. If they could have inbounded the ball, if they didn't turn the ball over right at the very end, or if Jaylen Brown doesn't make that incredible 3-point shot from the corner, they should have won that game. There's so many things that went right for the Celtics in that game. Maybe 1-0 Pacers there. Game 2, they just lost. The Celtics were better than them. Tyrese Halliburton's injury stopped any kind of comeback effort that they would have had. Game 3 at home, it seemed like they were going to win. They were up by 18. They blow that lead. They have an opportunity down 1, and they turn the ball over. Jrue Holiday picks their pockets, and then they get an open shot to send it to overtime, and it just doesn't go in. The ball bounces the wrong way. It doesn't go in. they're down 3-0 now instead of it being a 2-1 series. And game 4, the final one, the sweep, the game that solidified the sweep here, they again keep it close down the stretch. They're down 3, they get a possession, they miss that shot once again to go to overtime, or not, they turn the ball over yet again. And the Celtics have a shot, they miss it, the Pacers can't get a rebound, and then they don't foul, which is kind of shocking to me. That was I don't like how the Pacers handle late game situations. They had the worst closing sequences that I've seen, especially in a conference finals. You can't be having 3 games that you kind of let slip through your fingers just the way you play in the last minute. And a lot of it goes back to turnovers. I mentioned in game 1 and 3 that they turned the ball over at the end that kind of sealed the deal, and it happened again in game 4. It wasn't quite those crucial possessions. They were missing a lot of shots down the stretch, but they were also turning the ball over. There were about 3 possessions in a row with about 2 minutes to go left in the game where they just turned the ball over. And the Celtics also weren't being very safe with the ball, which was helping them stay in the game. But the Pacers, if they just didn't turn the ball over in the fourth quarter in 3 of these games, we might be talking about the Celtics with their back to the walls right now. And that is a drastically different turn to the series than what obviously has occurred, right? Now, Tyrese Halliburton goes out, and it's a question of how long they can keep this up. But the pace that they were playing at and the way that Celtics were kind of matching their energy, they weren't really playing that lockdown defense until the fourth quarter that we know the Celtics can play. I mean, they got 2 all defensive team players in their starting 5. And they did this without Kristaps Porzingis, someone who I thought the Celtics would like to get back in this series just so he can get his feet wet so he isn't rusty for the game 1 of the finals against presumably the Mavericks. You expect him to be back then. Hamstrings are a nasty injury. They're one of those things that they just keep nagging you. They go on for a very, very long time. So we don't know when he actually will be back. I expect him to be ready by 2 weeks from now, which is when the finals are going to start. But we'll have to see what happens there. The more crucial thing is their defense down the stretch, and I'm going to go and do a little presuming, a little bit of guessing here that the Mavericks are going to be the team out of the West here. So we're going to talk about how they match up with them a little bit. They come out of this series against the Pacers, who offensively, sure, they can be a match for the Mavericks, right? You kind of have experience putting up enough points to do it. But the Mavericks are a lot more physical defensively, especially with the trade deadline acquisitions of PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford. These guys came in and they immediately made a difference. I mean, you could see it right away. Right from that trade deadline, they were out of the playoffs at that point, or they were in the play-ins, I don't remember. But they weren't a 5 seed, They were in danger of missing the playoffs. They go and make this trade. Their defense before it was abysmal, near the bottom of the league. They come in and it immediately makes their defense more physical. They immediately start going on a win streak. Luka starts putting up insane monster numbers. I mean, he was doing that all season anyway, but he starts putting up more numbers than he was before. This is a team that is kind of like the Pacers, except they have stars. And you can make the argument that Tyrese Halliburton is a star, but he's in no way a star when you compare him to Luka Doncic or Kyrie Irving. At least the way that he was. He often doesn't take that shot in the moment that your number one go-to guy seems to be. At least that's what I was noticing for him. He kind of loses some confidence sometimes when he goes through a bad shooting stretch and he's a little more passive, which is fine. He's a point guard. He needs to be able to pass the ball. But at some point, you also need to be assertive when you are the guy on your team. But Luka is a guy, and we've seen it just a couple games ago when he hit that clutch 3 to win the game over Rudy Gobert, Defensive Player of the Year. And I know that's a mismatch in Luka's favor, but still, you have to hit a 3-pointer. You have to shake him at the perimeter, hit it over a 7'4" guy. That's not an easy thing to do. Rudy Gobert, even if he is out of position, is big, tall, and long enough that sometimes that he can come and make that shot, a little bit uncomfortable for you either way, right? So he had to hit that shot, and he makes it. He's a clutch player, right? He's one of the most clutch players in the league. Kyrie obviously has a history of making those clutch shots. In the finals, game-winning shot to help that 3-1 comeback when he was on the Cavs. This is a team that won't have issues closing like the Pacers did. And like I was saying before, if the Pacers could close these games effectively, there's a realistic shot that this series is 2-2, maybe even 3-2 at this point. Or maybe even 3-1 in favor of the Pacers at this point. So a lot of things can happen, and you can't continue to play sloppy basketball. And I know they were really pushing the pace because that's the way the Pacers play and the way the Celtics play. So it kind of just exponentially kept getting faster and faster and faster when they got into a groove, and that leads to more turnovers, more sloppy play, which is what we saw. And when the game got slowed down, the Celtics were able to recenter themselves and make those stops when they needed to. But the Mavericks are a team that will convert in the clutch, have the ability to close out games, and that's something that the Pacers were unable to do. So it's going to be a little bit of a harder job for the Celtics here. The Celtics advanced to the finals. They were the best team in the East by far. And in our next segment here, we're going to do a little bit of talking about their entire run to the finals so far. There's been a lot of media claims saying that the Celtics had the easiest path ever to the finals. So we're going to go through some numbers, and I know numbers don't tell the whole story, but we're going to go through some numbers talking about whether or not they really had the easiest path ever to the finals in the history of the NBA. So stick around for that. We will be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Everybody in the world down. Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around, I feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. Shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced. I'll get my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live, but choose to dip, you choose to fight, or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. Losing my mind.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down Game 4, really the entire series between the Pacers and the Celtics, as the Celtics sweep the Indiana Pacers and are the first team to punch their tickets to the NBA Finals. We'll see if the Mavericks join them tonight, but in this segment here, we are going to talk a little bit about the Celtics' path to the finals. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about that around the sports media world, talking about how, they have faced 3 teams where all 3 of those teams didn't have the best player on their team for injury reasons to get to their run. And they're saying this might be the worst, the easiest path to the finals in NBA history. There's a really good article on Yahoo Sports by Ben Rohrbach that we're going to go over that talks a lot about that, breaks down a lot of the numbers. So we will go through that in just a second. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I will go ahead and answer that as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you for sticking around, talking some sports with me on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Once again, that link is on the screen. It's gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we are going to talk a little more about the Celtics path. And I haven't really gotten too far to it because the Celtics have had an easy path, just straight up. And it doesn't really surprise you if you take a step back from being in the moment of, oh, everybody's bashing on the Celtics because it's the Celtics. And of course they made it, because this was the expectation, right? There's a reason that this is the storyline right now, and it's because, like I was saying in the first segment a little bit, if the Celtics didn't make the finals, it was going to be a disappointment. They were head and shoulders, maybe a whole body above everybody else in the East for the entire season. You know, it wasn't really even a contest. You know, everybody would have laughed at the Celtics if they had not made it to the NBA Finals. You know, this was the minimum that they needed to accomplish because the East was so weak this year. You can look at the standings from 7 for every single team that made the playoffs, 7 and 8 included. They were separated by less than 5 games. It was kind of a crapshoot. It was the Celtics, and then it was everybody else. You know, it wasn't really even that close. So that's the reason why this conversation is happening, right? This conversation is happening because the Celtics were head and shoulders above everybody else in the East, and this was the expectation for them. And if they had fallen short, they would have been the laughingstock of the league. But now that they have accomplished the bare minimum for their season, which is make the NBA Finals, people are asking, hey, is this the easiest run ever? And it's not the fault of people for asking. You know, this is always the question when people want to discredit teams. It happened in the NFL with the Eagles just 2 years ago, you know, when they went and faced the Chiefs and lost in the Super Bowl there. They had a very easy run, and people were saying, oh, they don't stand a chance because of the easy run. And I feel like that's a good example. Even though they didn't end up winning, that game went down to the wire against a very, very good Chiefs team. A Chiefs team that has now won 2 Super Bowls in a row, you know? So, just because it's an easy schedule, it's an easy road to the finals, doesn't mean that this team isn't great, because this team is great. It objectively is. There's a reason that people are hating on Jason Tatum's MVP case, because, oh, he has a super team. It's a super team. This team is incredible. And their run to the finals, like I said, they probably would have made it even if they faced a completely healthy squad in all 3 of these rounds. It would have been harder, but they would have made it. And they took care of business. It's not their decision. You know, they lost someone as well. Kristaps Porzingis is a big part of their game. But round 1 against the Heat, no Jimmy Butler. Round 2 against the Cavaliers, you know, no Donovan Mitchell for the last couple games. Round 3 against the Pacers, obviously no Halliburton for the last couple games. So we saw how it goes, and they were a little more competitive in each series. But if you just go based on the numbers, regular season wins, averaging the opponents that it takes to get to the finals, they had the 18th easiest, 18 out of 40. This is going back to 1984, which is the first year that the field expanded to 8 teams per conference, so 16 teams total. 1984 is the first year. Didn't go any further back than that. It's a lot to go through box scores all for a long time. So I limited my search back to 1984, which, like I said, is the first time that we had the NBA bracket as we know it today. They had the 18th easiest. So there's 40 teams, 40 years. They had the 18th easiest. So they're around 50% here. The average win count for the teams that they played is 47, right? The Heat won 46, the Cavs won 48, and the Pacers won 47. So it's right there in the middle. Like I was saying, the 8 seed, the 6 seed, and the 4 seed, you know, all separated by 1 or 2 games. So that's how the state of the Eastern Conference is. But, you know, people make this argument, you know, the 2016 Golden State Warriors had an easier schedule by the numbers. And I know that doesn't tell the whole story, but that's just how you have to look at it a little bit. This was not the easiest path ever. They had to go through their own stuff, and it makes it look easier because of how dominant they were in the regular season. That regular season dominance, the way that they were able to hold back everyone else in the East, and I mean literally everybody else in the East, contributes to this kind of narrative here. And like this article points out, you can go back to, the 1980s, the 1984 Los Angeles Lakers, who had the second, or 1987 Los Angeles Lakers, who had the easiest schedule. 39 is the average for wins that they played in all 3 rounds for all the teams that they played. Nobody talks about that anymore. That's not important. In 10 years from now, no one's going to be like, oh, the Celtics? Yeah, they had a super easy schedule to get there, so it doesn't count. No, that's not what's going to happen. This team is really good, and they deserve to be there, and they have legit championship odds. There's a reason they were the favorites heading into the playoffs. There's a reason that they've been favored in every single matchup. There's a reason. They're this good. So don't sleep on the Celtics because they had an easy path. Sure, it was easy, but it was not the easiest one ever. And that's not an easy thing to just sit there and say, oh yeah, this is the easiest one ever. Because I know personally, I did not watch every single game, and I was not alive in the 80s to really get the full scope of, all the context of what's going on in these games anyway, even if I were to watch it. If you are just watching these games, especially this final series, the one that they swept the Pacers in, if you watch this game 20 years from now and you don't know anybody on either team, you look at these results, 3-point game, 3-point game, 2-point, the overtime games, you say, oh, this was not an easy schedule at all. This was a tough series that they managed to get through on their way to the finals. Obviously, with context, we know a little bit more. But that's always how it goes. This was not the easiest path in finals history. They had to work to get here, and the regular season is a big part of that as well. In our next segment, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, but we're going to transition out of basketball now, and in our next segment, we're going to move onto the ice. We're going to talk about a hat trick propelling the Dallas Stars. Jason Robertson puts 3 goals up on the Oilers and powers them past to a 2-1 lead in that series. So coming up next in segment 3, we will talk about that. Stick around in segment 4. We're going to talk about Angel Hernandez being finally retiring from the MLB, and there's breaking news out of the NFL we will cover in segment 5, along with some proposed new rules. So stick around for all of that. We will be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we have just finished our basketball coverage for the day. We talked about the Celtics Game 4, and we talked about their path to the finals. They are the first team this season to punch their ticket to the finals, their second finals in 3 years. We'll see if they are able to finally get one, but If you want to hear more about that, go back and watch that. In this segment here, we're going to talk about hockey for a little bit. The game last night put the Stars up 2-1 in the series over Edmonton. They get a win on the road, officially taking back home ice advantage. Jason Robertson puts up a hat trick to propel them past the Oilers. We're going to talk about that and much more in this game in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you are if you want to be a bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Go ahead and leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, or everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all you want me to cover, go ahead and leave a comment. I will get to it as soon as I can, or go ahead and leave a donation at gsmcpodcast.net. I appreciate anybody for leaving a comment, asking a question, and everybody for tuning in and talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to move into some hockey coverage here today. The NHL is heating up. Jason Robertson has a hat trick, leading the Stars past the Edmonton Oilers in Edmonton to give them a 2-1 series lead over Connor McDavid, Stuart Skinner, Leon Draisaitl, and the Edmonton Oilers. And this was a very interesting game, right? Just like in the last couple games, and like I was saying when we broke a little bit of this series down yesterday, the Stars start slow. They continue to start slow every single game. They've had less than 10 shots in the first period in every single game, and Game 3 was no different. This one caught my eye especially because they fell down 2-0 in the first period, and they were outshot, I believe, like 15-4. They only had 4 shots in that period, and when we were breaking down the keys to this series, it seemed like the Oilers were hitting on all cylinders, and the Stars were not, if you only watch that first period. Like I was saying yesterday, the keys to this series for each team, for the Oilers, defense, blocking those shots, not playing defense better and being a little more aggressive, leading to, breakaways and stuff like that. That's what they did in the first period. They did that awesome. And then and that's what their key was. For the Stars, their key was get pucks on net. They didn't do that in the first period, and you see what happened. They fall down 2-0 to a team that just looked better than them. But for the rest of that game, the Stars got pucks on net. They created scrums in front of the net. Stuart Skinner made a bunch of great saves. But the Edmonton defense really isn't good enough to stop every single scrum, and that's what we saw. I believe a majority of their goals were scored off of rebounds, putback opportunities. There were about 10 guys in front of the net for at least 3 of their goals. They were all there scraping for the puck, trying to get it in the net, and it just goes in. The Edmonton defense in a pickle like that, Stuart Skinner in a pickle like that, wasn't good enough to make those stops, and the Stars' offense is. And they took advantage of that late in the game, in the second period, in the third period especially. Jason Robertson, the star young player emerging last season, has a hat trick. Like I said, they were down 2-0 after the first period. That is not the situation you want to be against an Edmonton Oilers team with an offense as high-powered as theirs. You don't want to give them that momentum. You don't want to give them that confidence, because if you give them that confidence, they're going to continue to play the way they are. Like I said, there are takeaways, good and bad, for both of these teams, and it's going to be tough for the Oilers to rebound from this one because everything was going the way they planned it in that first period. But hockey's a long game, and it's a grueling game, and they just were not able to keep that energy up for the entirety of the game. We saw it in the first period, and then it looked like they got comfortable. They fell back into their old rhythm. If they want to compete, if they want to win in this series, they need to play like that every single period. And it's not all on them. The Stars also adjusted, right? The Stars adjusted, and they just started putting pucks on net. They weren't looking for that perfect shot, playing perfectionist offense. But the Stars just are a deeper team. And that's really the issue here for the Oilers. They're kind of outmatched on just about every single level, aside from offense, where they can outmatch even an all-star team, maybe. But there's a lot of good and a lot of bad to take away from this game. Like I said, the Oilers, they played them tough. They were able to tie the game. Like I said, 5-3 is the final score, but with an empty netter, it's really only 4-3. Box score will tell you differently, but it really only was a 1-goal game. Stuart Skinner made a lot of great saves. He played a great game, and if he continues to play like this, they will win more games than they are right now. Now, what worked in the Vancouver series was switching goaltenders, and that lit a spark under them. They switched goaltenders. They started with Stuart Skinner, then they switched to Pickard, and then they switched back to Skinner. So, we'll see what they do here. Maybe they make a switch, because that is what kind of lit a fire after they lost 2 games in a row. And when they went back on elimination, they switched back again. If I'm the Oilers, I don't make a switch because Skinner played a great game. This was not his fault. You can look at the box score and say, oh, he gave up 4 goals. But he didn't give up any easy goals. All the goals that he gave up were, like I said, big scrums in front of the net. He piles and piles of bodies there just trying to get the puck elevated into the net, and that's how it went in. You can't blame a goalie for that. At that point, if you're a goalie, you kind of just have to hope and pray and hope that your instincts can block the shot for you, because you are not seeing the puck in that mess. Maybe some goalies are, but the vast majority of them are not seeing it there. He played a great game. Connor McDavid had a goal in this one, but like I said, the main story is Jason Robertson powering them with a hat trick. He's someone that's been relatively quiet this postseason. And the Stars luckily haven't needed him to be too loud. They have plethora of resources. Too many of them, some might say. Wyatt Johnson, Miro Heiskanen on defense, Rupe Hintz, lots and lots of talent that they don't need a guy like Jason Robertson. But when he's on, if he can continue this pace, now he doesn't need a hat trick every single night for them to win. Certainly doesn't hurt though. If he can continue to get himself into the score sheet, it's going to help these Dallas Stars immensely. And it's a good thing to see that all of their stars are starting to produce. They've been relying on some of their older guys. Sagan has been huge for them. He's a little older. It's good to see some of the young guys get into it. Jamie Benn has had a huge couple goals for them in this postseason. And it's been really good to see the contribution from everybody across the entire depth, the entire field from the Stars. Hello, Kelsey. Welcome into the show. But if we're looking at the future of this series, we got one more game in Edmonton, and the Stars need to take this one. They can't fall behind 3-1. The Stars are too good and too deep of a team for them to fall behind and be able to make a comeback like they did against the Vancouver Canucks. The Canucks, as good as they were dealing with some goalie injuries, and as good as Sheelos was in that series, he wasn't, all-star level goalie that the Stars have in Jake Ottinger. And that can absolutely make the difference, especially against a team with such great snipers. So we'll see what happens. The Stars played great in that second half, but if the Oilers can play like they did in that first period for even 2 periods of a game, they probably win. So they just need to be able to keep that energy and intensity up. But we'll see what happens as the series continues. Game 4 is tomorrow. In our next segment, we are going to transition out of hockey. We are going to move on to the baseball diamond. For the second day in a row, we had some big breaking news. Angel Hernandez, the infamous umpire, officially retired, effective immediately. We'll talk about everything that kind of leads up to that, and the whole journey to finally get him to retire. So stick around for that. We will be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the Stars taking a 2-1 series lead over the Edmonton Oilers. And in our first two segments, we talked about the Celtics advancing to the finals and their path to get there. In this segment here, we are going to move on to the baseball diamond, talk a little bit about the official retirement of Angel Hernandez, the infamous umpire. And if you know the name of an umpire or an official in sports, rule of thumb is they're not doing a good job. And just about everybody knows Angel Hernandez's name, so we will talk about the whole saga. It goes back over a decade to finally get him to retire. It's a whole story. And in segment 5, to close out our show, we're going to transition to the NFL, talk about some new proposed offseason changes, and a breaking news involving a wide receiver on the Texans. So stick around for that. But before we get into Angel Hernandez, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments. For instance, Kelsey asks, who do you think wins tonight, the Panthers or the Rangers? It's back in, it's still in Florida. The Rangers have a 2-1 lead. I think the Panthers will even up this series. They've lost 2 straight in overtime, and I think they're going to, tie up the series here. It should be a tight game. I'm curious to see if it goes to overtime for a third time, though. It should be exciting. But yeah, if you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and put it in the comment. I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. In this segment here, though, we are going to talk about the retirement of Angel Hernandez. Angel Hernandez, the famous, infamous MLB umpire. It has been quite the ordeal to get to this point. And if you are on any kind of baseball social media, you can see the sigh of relief coming from all corners of baseball of baseball social media. It's a celebration. It's a party. Angel Hernandez finally is gone. And he is leaving at a crucial time for umpires. And the main reason he hadn't been gone sooner is because of the umpire union. And, they just have a collectively bargaining agreement saying basically you can't fire us, which is it's kind of crazy that you can't fire an umpire. But it's made it very hard to get rid of guys like Angel Hernandez. And with these new talks, there is a new collective bargaining agreement coming up with umpires. And with that on the table, along with the proposal of the automatic strike zone that's been pushed back to 2026, I think that definitely had a lot to do with it. Like I said, they are negotiating this right now, and I'm sure something in the collective bargaining agreement will have to protect them from this robot umpiring, so they didn't want that implemented before this new CBA was agreed upon. Angel Hernandez probably is another negotiating chip. He leaves, robo-umps go. That kind of deal, right? So that's what this looks like to me. But we have to go back a long time. Players and managers and people all around the league, like I said, for over a decade, have been trying to get Angel Hernandez to retire. And finally he does it, and it's a big party around the league. He is known for having an abysmal strike zone. Making some of the worst strike and ball calls of all time. Now, if you look at just straight up at the numbers, like percentage of correct calls, he's kind of league average, about 90%, 91%, which is surprisingly great. We only really notice them when they mess up, but the league average for umpires nowadays is sitting at like 92.8% or something like that, somewhere right around there. Seems a little bit below average at about 91%. But the issue isn't how often he's right. It's how awful the incorrect calls are. He will consistently he keeps a consistent zone, to be fair, but it's consistently wrong. It's consistently way too far outside, or way too high, or way too low, missing pitches sometimes right down the middle. It's something that has to go, and really he is the main argument for a lot of people of why robot umps should be put into the game. You don't want bad calls completely ruining it. Because one pitch, one bad call should have been a strikeout, turns into a home run on the next pitch. That can completely change the way that the game goes, the flow of the game in baseball. So Angel Hernandez finally retiring is an overall positive thing for the league. It just is. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. There's a reason that every single team in the league has been trying to get this done, and even the league office has been trying to get this done for over a decade. This is something that everybody wants, everybody can see clearly is a problem. And he's not the only umpire out there that makes bad calls. CB and Drake, one of them, I believe it was Drake, made a missed call. It was literally right down the middle of the plate. But the big one is gone. And as long as people go back to not knowing the names of umpires, it's a good thing. Honestly, I think at a minimum, he should have been not allowed to call balls and strikes anymore. Because that's just what he's not good at. And you have to know what you're good at and not good at. It's good that he's finally gone. Like I said, an overall positive for the entire league, this entire sport of baseball. The retirement is effective immediately. He hadn't called a game since May 9th, so he's kind of been like in and out of the sport. He's been calling less and less games in the last couple years, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't calling games. But May 9th officially now was his last game. He is never going to call another MLB game. He officially is retired. I wish him well on whatever else he does. I just don't really want him to umpire another game, because we need the balls and strikes correct. And I know as much as it is a part of the game to have that human element behind the plate, it can't be that bad. It's fine to if it's like half an inch off the plate or some millimeters or centimeters off the plate, it's fine. There's some pitches where on ESPN it might be called a strike, on Baseball Savant it might be called a ball, on one broadcast it's a strike, on another broadcast it's a ball. There's some pitches where it really is just kind of right on the corner, right on the clip, and it's tough to see. And those are fine. You don't expect these guys to get 100% right, because it's not an easy job, right? If you go and watch some of those angles, they don't have that straight on angle, which kind of crazy to me. I feel like it makes it a lot harder when you are a little to the side, but they don't always have. It's just how they decide to set up sometimes. But overall, it is a positive for the game. Angel Hernandez is gone, and the baseball world can rejoice. One less known ref/ump is out of the sports world. But yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on him being out of the league now. Like I said, this was a decades-long process, and the umpire union was kind of protecting him. I think they kind of traded him to keep the rest of them for at least another season. And I'm sure they're going to have something in the CBA about robot umps saying, hey, you can't replace us. But I think he was like an appeasement piece to make that happen for one more season. That's my theory on this whole thing, why it was finally able to happen. But anyway, in our next segment, we are going to finish off our show talking about some breaking news in the NFL. There was a report today coming out saying the NFLPA is going to try and overhaul the entire offseason schedule, and also a new contract is giving out. Breaking news for a Texans wide receiver. We'll talk about that, how that affects the Texans season. The Texans have had a very interesting offseason, especially at the wide receiver position. So we'll talk about all of that coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about Angel Hernandez finally retiring from the MLB. That's one less known umpire out of the league, which is always a good thing. In the first couple segments, we talked about the Boston Celtics being the first team to advance to the NBA Finals. We talked about their path, how it might have been one of the easiest ever, and if that really matters at all. And in the third segment, we talked about the Dallas Stars and Jason Robertson taking a 2-1 series lead over the Edmonton Oilers off of a hat trick from Jason Robertson as they continue their series in Edmonton. In this segment, we are going to finish off our show talking about the NFL. There was some breaking news coming out of the NFL involving a NFL wide receiver and a new contract. And there's a potential for a new offseason overhaul. The way that the offseason works right now might change completely coming up in just a bit. But before we get into that, remember, if you want to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Go ahead and leave a tip or donation with a message in it at gsmcpodcast.net. It should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave a comment. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Once again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. I appreciate all of you for sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our show today in the biggest league in America, the NFL. The NFL had, and we're going to start off with the breaking news, actually. So, breaking news. Nico Collins of the Houston Texans signs a new 3-year, $72 million deal, making him the second new contract changed in the Texans organizations this season. He gets $52 million guaranteed. The max the contract can go up to is $75 million. So nice payday for a young receiver who had 9 touchdowns with C.J. Stroud last season. Huge get for the Houston Texans as they continue to build up that wide receiver room, one that's looking like one of the best in football. Obviously, the big trade earlier this offseason for Stephon Diggs. They reduce his contract to a 1-year deal, so he's in contract season mode, so he should have a big season. Tank Dell, coming off an injury, reportedly is going to be ready to go for the season. Nico Collins, they also make a trade for Ben Skoranek. So they have been making moves all offseason to improve that wide receiver core, a wide receiver core that was already very, very good. You keep getting weapons for your second-year quarterback, your reigning rookie of the year quarterback, someone who was legitimately in MVP conversations last season. If CJ Stroud continues to have his weapons and he can continue to play the way that he did in his rookie season, they are legitimate Super Bowl contenders this season. That defense gets better. That offense already was good enough. You know, they won a playoff game last season with CJ Stroud as a rookie. The future is bright in Houston right now. So congratulations to Nico Collins. Go and go make your money. We're here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. We're big fans of players getting their money at all times. So congratulations to him. Go ball out. Anyway, that is a deep wide receiver room now. It's an incredibly deep receiver room, and that's exactly what you need. Everyone there is locked up, other than Stephon Diggs, which still kind of baffles me why they did that. He had a 3 or 4 year deal that they reduced to a 1 year contract, and maybe it's what he wanted, but you have a all-pro level receiver locked up for quite some time. There's no reason not to keep him around for at least the duration of your quarterback's rookie contract. But the Texans can do what they want to do. Maybe they know something that I don't, and maybe they're worried about the stories of him being that locker room cancer popping up again in Houston. But usually he's good for the first couple seasons. One season, I just don't quite understand it. Anyway. That's a whole nother story we talked about back when he first got traded. But the main NFL topic that I wanted to talk about today is a new report that came out this morning talking about off-season schedule. An off-season schedule, usually, right now, the way that it works, is a voluntary 9-week program. It's broken down into three phases. Phase 1 is what's happening. It happened a little while ago, which is voluntary minicamp. That starts in mid-April, right? Phase 2 becomes organized team activities, or OTAs, which is what's happening right now. And then phase 3 is the mandatory minicamp, which happens a little bit later on, and we haven't quite hit that yet. The new proposed one would just be a 9-week program, same way it is. It would start a little bit later, and it would start in mid-June instead of starting back in April, and it would just be a little ramp up. You know, there's no more voluntary stuff. It's just longer training camp, basically. And I think that's a good thing. I never quite understood the reason that they did the NFL offseason scattered like this, right? I think longer break after the Super Bowl is a good thing, and now, instead of rushing back to camp, voluntary camp that most veterans miss anyway, you get everybody in the building at the same time. They all get to meet and know each other, and it's great for team building. It's a slower ramp up. It's not as physically demanding right away on everybody else. You still need to be conditioning in the off season. Obviously, you don't want to show up to mini camp not looking like you're ready to play football, but it does absolutely help when you to have it just be a ramp-up process. You can get people ready to go. You don't have to dive right in, and you have more time to prepare these guys for the season. And I think the idea behind it is it's going to stop injuries. Now, this is something that has to be agreed upon with the NFLPA and the NFL. This is a proposal coming from the NFLPA. So we'll see what the NFL thinks of this. This is obviously not something that is set in stone, but I do think that this is a very interesting proposal. Overhauling a whole off-season program is not an easy thing to do, and I think this is a very simple fix. You know, it's not changing the amount of time that they have in the mini camps. It's just getting rid of some of the voluntary ones, which it just doesn't make much sense. And I think even though there won't be voluntary things anymore, you'll still see some older vets just kind of show up late anyway. They'll get that kind of veteran benefit of the doubt there. They'll talk to the team and stuff, but we'll see how that goes. I'm in favor of it. I think it's a great idea. I think one long camp is better than 3 split up camps, and I never quite understood why they were split up anyway. But that's just my thoughts. I'd love to hear what you guys think of the NFLPA's new idea for the off season. Like I said, it would go from 3 sessions of 3 weeks to 1 session of 9 weeks. It would start a little bit later, and it would just be like a ramp up process. I think that's the better way to do it. But anyway, that's it for today's show. We talked about a whole lot, and coming up tomorrow, we'll talk about potentially the matchup, the finals matchup, the NBA finals matchup between the Celtics and maybe the Mavericks if they are able to win tonight at home the way they're going. I think the Wolves, with their back against the wall, should be able to steal a game. They're good enough of a team, but I'm not sure if they will be able to, because Luka is playing at a whole nother level right now that no one on the Wolves really has been able to hit, and their shooting woes kind of have been holding them back quite a lot. But anyway, we will talk about all of that tomorrow and any other breaking news, any other big news coming out in the next 24 hours around the world of sports. You've been listening to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. I will see you all then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up. My it's for me a bad day.